Resultant of two forces acting on one point. Choose the correct answer from the given ones. 1. The magnitude of two forces acting on a particle are 5 and 8 Newton. Then the smallest value of their resultant equal 2, 3, 7 or 13. Solution. The smallest value, it is the minimum value. So minimum value of resultant equals absolute the difference between these two forces, 5 minus 8, which equal absolute -3, which equal 3 Newton, and the answer will be B. Notice that in this case, if we have the first force is F1 in this direction, of course the second will be in the opposite direction, starting from the same point. One of them will be and the other will be 5, and the measure of the angle between them will be 180 degrees. So the magnitude of two forces acting on a particle are 5 and 8 Newton. Then the smallest value of the resultant, smallest value equals 3, and the measure of the angle between them will be 180 degrees. Next question. The magnitude of two forces are 2F and 5F. So we have F1 equals 2F and F2 equals 5F Newton, and the measure of their included angle is theta. So the angle between them, if we have F1 here and there is F2, and the angle between them of measure theta, and the resultant is 3F, so we draw the resultant here, which equal 3F, denoted by the symbol R. Okay, now then the measure of theta equals 0, 60, 90 or 180 degrees. The first rule or the main rule is R square equals F1 square plus F2 square plus 2 F1 F2 cosine the included angle theta, not alpha. R square, we have R equals 3F, so R square equals 9F square equals F1 square 4F square plus 25F square plus 2 multiply 5F, which equal 20F square cosine theta. So 9F square equals 4 plus 25, it is 29F square plus 20F square plus 20 f square cosine theta. So 9 f square minus 29 f square equals 20 f square cosine theta. So negative 20 f square equals 20 f square cosine theta, and cosine theta equals negative 20 f square divided by 20 f square, which equal negative 1. So theta equals cosine minus 1 negative 1 here, which equal 180 degrees, and we'll choose letter D. Of course we can solve it without these all steps, because we have here 2F and 3F are the two forces, and the difference between them or the resultant is 3, and the resultant here is the difference between the absolute difference between them. So they are in two opposite directions, and the measure of the angle included is 180. But if you wanted to solve it in steps, there is the steps here. If you wanted to solve it directly, you can choose 180 degrees. If the resultant of two forces acting at a point reached to its maximum value, so we have R is maximum, so we can say that R equals F1 plus F2, and the angle between them, denoted by the symbol alpha, equals 0 degrees. So back to the question. The resultant of two forces acting at a point reached to its maximum value, then the measure of their included angle between the two forces is 0, and this is our choice. If you wanted to draw it, here we have the first force and the other on the same direction, starting from the same point here, and the angle between them, alpha, equals 0 degrees. Next question. Two forces of magnitude 6n. Here we have F1 equals 6 Newton, and F2 equals 8 Newton. If the magnitude of their resultant is 10, R equals 10 Newton. Okay, then the measure of the angle between the forces is one of these. So we write the rule here: R square equals F1 square, the included angle, denoted by alpha, in degrees, and we will substitute. R square will be 100 equals F1 square, which equals 36, plus F2 square 64 plus 2 multiply 6 multiply 8, it is 48 multiply 2 equals 96. 96 cosine alpha. We have 36 plus 64 equals 100, and 100 minus 100 equals 0. So 0 equals 96 cosine alpha, and cosine alpha equals 0 divide 96, which equals 0. So alpha equals cosine minus 1 0, which equal 90 degrees, which equal 90 degrees. Two forces of magnitude 3F and F. So we have F1 equals 3F, and F2 equals F Newton, and the resultant, here is a given, R equals 4F Newton. Then the measure of the angle between them, again we will use the same rule. We'll use the same rule, or you can solve it directly. Here the resultant is 4F here, and it is equal the sum of the two forces. So what we can say about it, we can say that the resultant, since the resultant equals the sum of the two forces, then the measure of the included angle equals 0. So directly we choose 0. Question 6, two forces of magnitudes 3 root 2. So we have F1 equals 3 root 2, and F2 equals 6 Newton, and the measure of the angle between them is 135. Alpha equals 135 degrees. Then the measure of the angle between their resultant and the second force is the measure of the angle between the resultant and the second force. So we'll draw it. We have the two forces, F1 and F2, and here we have the resultant in this direction from the same point. Alpha equals 135 degrees, and the measure of the angle between R and the second force is theta. So what is the value of theta? So we have F2 equals 6 Newton, and F1 equals 3 root 2 here. The required is to calculate the measure of the angle between R and the measure and the force of magnitude 6 Newton. So considering this angle equals theta, so tan theta equals, here we write 6 plus 3 root 2 cosine the included angle 135, and in the numerator we write 3 root 2 sine 135. Always theta connected with the force written here. There is a connection between them. Theta is the angle included between the resultant and the force of magnitude 6. And you calculated tan theta equals, you can use calculator here. So tan theta equals 1 and theta equals tan minus 1, 1, which equal, also you can use calculator, it is equal 45, but you can always use calculator. Shift tan 1, it is equal 45 degrees. 45 degrees. Two equal forces, the magnitude of each of them is 6 Newton. So we can write F1 equals F2 equals 6 Newton. The magnitude of the resultant is 6 Newton. Also we have R equals 6 Newton. Then the angle between them equals, we write the main rule, it is R equals 2F cosine alpha over 2. We have R is 6 equals 2 multiply 6 cosine alpha over 2. So cosine alpha over 2 equals 6 divided 12, which equal half, and we can deduce that alpha over 2 equals 60 degrees, and then alpha equals 120 degrees, and your choice will be C. Two forces of equal magnitudes including between them an angle of measure pi over 2. Again we have, or let F1 equals F2 equals F, and the included angle denoted by the symbol alpha equals pi over 2. If the magnitude of the resultant is 8, R equals 8 Newton, then the value of each force measured in Newton is, again we'll use the same rule. R is 8 equals 2F cosine alpha over 2, and the alpha equals pi over 2. So we have cosine, pi over 2. So we have pi over 4 as pi over 2 divide 2 equals pi over 4. And we rewrite it, 8 equals 2F cosine pi over 4, it is 45, okay, 45 degrees. So dividing both sides by 2, here we have 1, here we have 4. So 4 equals F multiply cosine 45. Cosine 45 equals root 2 over 2. or you can write 1 over root 2. So f equals 4 divide 1 over root 2, which equal 4 root 2, and the answer will be letter C. Two equal forces in magnitude. The magnitude of their resultant is 7 root 3. So we have R equals 7 root 3, and the measure of the included angle is pi over 3, and alpha equals pi over 3. Then the magnitude of each of them, they ask about f. The value of f equals, again we write the rule. So we have R equals 7 root 3. 7 root 3 equals 2f cosine alpha. We have alpha equals pi over 3. Pi over 3 divided 2 equals pi over 6. So 7 root 3 equals 2f cosine pi over 6. Pi over 6, it is 30, and the cosine 30 equals root 3 over 2. Simplifying, we have divide 2 equals 1 equals 1, and dividing both sides by root 3. Here we have 1, we have 1. Of course you can use calculator. Then f equals 7, and we will choose letter D. Two forces of magnitudes 8 and f. So we have f1 equals 8 gram weight, and f2 equals f, it's the same unit, gram weight. The measure of the angle between them is alpha, okay, and the alpha included between 0 and pi, 0 and 180. The resultant bisects the included angle between them. So if we have here the two forces, f1 and f2, and the resultant bisect the angle between them, so we have alpha over 2 and the other alpha over 2. Here we have R, f1, f2. So since the resultant R bisects the included angle, so f1 equals f2, and each equal 8 gram weight, and this is your choice. No need for more calculation. Two forces of magnitudes 3 and f Newton, and the measure of the angle between them is 120 if the resultant perpendicular to the first force. So the value of F in Newton is, so we'll draw it. Here we have F1 and F2 and the resultant here. here is F1 and F2 and we have R. F1 two forces of magnitude S3 and here we have F, and the measure of the angle between them is 120. Here is 120 degrees, and the resultant is perpendicular to the first force, so the measure of this angle is 90 degrees. So the value of F in Newton is, so we write the rule, tan theta, it is the angle included between the resultant and F1, equals F2 sine alpha over F1 plus F2 cosine alpha. So tan 90 equals F2, here is F2 of magnitude F sine 120 over 3 plus F cosine 120. Tan 90 is undefined, so the denominator equals 0. So we can write 3 plus F cosine 120 equals 0, and then 3 plus F multiply cosine 120, it is negative half, equals 0, and then F equals 6, and you can choose letter D.